Well, hello everybody. I'll give it that few minutes to let people log on. CNN's doing a special report this weekend, and again, it's on SCOTUS and just how corrupt over the decades the Liberal Democrats believe SCOTUS is becoming. In fact, they do a whole 1 hour special dumping massive amounts of money into propagating the fact that SCOTUS is corrupt. SCOTUS is not an independent judiciary. SCOTUS doesn't follow the will of the American people. I want to be clear here, everybody. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States of America, is the only independent judiciary nearly in the entire world. What do I mean by that? The United States of America is a constitutional republic found and based on we the people of the United States of America. Now, there were lawyers and there were founding fathers who put it together. And folks, the states, the original states, many of which already had constitutions, state-level constitutions. I'm going to say it again. The United States of America, plural, meaning many states. They weren't called provinces. They weren't called territories. They weren't called regions. There's many, many other names you could use. They called them states. Individual states, like mini republics, because they already had division of powers, because they already had their own state constitutions. The American Constitution for many states isn't older than the states' constitutions themselves. So when USA was created, and as it grew to 50 states, it adopted federalism, which brings me to the propaganda made today on Sunday. It's actually just concluding right now as I'm doing this video for all of you, but I've saw all I need to see out of that video. I made my notes, and we're going to go through that as best as I can, touching on everything that CNN propagates, the absolute unlawful left that is the United States of America, that is the Democrat Party of the United States. Now, I'm Canadian. I know Canadians say, well, what does that have to do with us? Why do we care? Well, Canadians, you're a broken federalism. You've never enacted any of the division of powers promised to you, based just like the United States of America. You are to have provincial and territorial constitutions. Now, again, USA did that before they became the United States of America. Even in their war of independence to become America, individual states already had constitutions. Division of powers, real federalism, was to be and always going to be a part of the United States of America. That means state-level power, the regional power of regional governance in a United States with a federal division of powers that all the states could agree to give up and allow to be administered at a federal level. Very limited. Very limited. In fact, USA constituted and created, since its birth, the power of each state to defend itself against the federal government, meaning if you try to mess with this, we have the power to fight back, fight for our independence, not unlike what happened with Britain and the War of Independence. Okay? That's what they designed. Whether people like that or not, that's what it is. Now, the Supreme Court was designed later, 1789, it came after, as a power, a separate division of power, an independent judiciary, to not go with the will of the people. Because, folks, remember, American independence was independence from a monarchical system. Divine rulers who could easily propagate and misguide the mass population into servitude. You know, subject. I know all about it. I'm a subject here in Canada. We have all kinds of people. There's first class, there's a second class, there's a third class, the subjects, average Joe Jane, basically legalized slaves of divine first class politicians, whether they're elected or appointed. Now, USA didn't want any of that. They had a massive war against that, barely made that, but they did it at overwhelming costs. They did that. And in their hindsight, in their forethought, the forefathers' thoughts, and going forward, lawyers and non-lawyers alike, they said, we need an independent judiciary. That can't be the people's court, meaning it can't be the court of popular opinion. Because people can get bamboozled pretty easily. Look what we all just went through. Taxation without representation, a foreign divinity, people fall into that. The forefathers had the good sense to know that people like to be catalyzed. They like to be in a group and go with popular opinion. That can be devastating, as seen throughout all the world. Just look at the communisms, the dictatorships, the constitutional monarchies, whether codified or unwritten. It's been devastating in the world history. Before World War II, that was the entire world, ruled the entire world. USA fought to get away from that. Other countries did too. USSR did too, in a different way. But we're not going to get into USSR and its federalism and then now the Russian Federation. We're going to focus today on the corruption of CNN, the propaganda they laid out over the last hour. They go right after the Federalist Society of the United States of America. They say it's conservative justices from this millionaire organization. They say, oh, they get all kinds of donations. Oh, it's a powerful group to upset the people's popular opinion. Folks, they're justices and lawyers. The Federalist Society, do you know what the first sentence, the first belief of that society, its stated objective? To respect the federal list system of USA, meaning restrict the federal powers. Never let the federal powers encroach on any of the 50 states. To always have a line, follow rule of law, and I mean quote word for word. To follow the Constitution textually, word for word, because it's in plain speak, folks. You don't need to be a lawyer when you read the United States Constitution. Makes sense then as it was that day, as it's been ever since in all its amendments. Anyone can clearly read the Constitution, and clearly, word for word, it's exactly as it sounds. It doesn't take massive interpretation. That's the beautiful part of it. And that's the stated objective of the Federalist Society, made up of justices and lawyers around the United States. That is absolutely in all the highest academic institutions in the world, in the USA. That is what those lawyers in the USA and justices swear and believe in. Yes, we the people, but the Constitution of the United States and the promise that they will follow it word for word as textually written. Amendments can come and go and changes can be made. There's rules for that, but they follow that constitutional design to a T. It is not the court of people's popular opinion. It's the court of the written word of the Constitution, and to respect the powers of all 50 states and to limit the over-abuse of the federal government. Federalism, folks, I'm going to tell you again, that is a country that divides up its powers so that there's not one central government running everybody and everything. Do you think that's a good thing for China? Do you think that's a good thing for any of the dictatorships around the world? We can run USA down all we want, but at the end of the day, it behaves better for the people than any real other example in the world. We can criticize it for many things, but you'll never see as many freedoms for people in the world than you will see in the United States of America. Anyone saying anything else is cockamamie, and it's not accurate in any way, shape, or form. And these are probably the same people that have never really lived under a dictatorship or a constitutional monarchy, or who've had these serious abuses or rights removed with no justification, none whatsoever, or a king's court, or a pay for justice juristocracy, because those are the alternatives, folks. Those are the alternatives. So that was the first thing. They go after the Federalist Society as some kind of boogeyman. It's kind of the left's conspiracy theory that this organization picks justices who are conservative. They're conservative in the real sense of rule of law conservative, i.e. all of them are lawyers and justices, sworn to the Constitution of the United States of America. That's how they're raised in the United States. Not like Canada, where a justice or a lawyer is raised with an oath to the crown first-class politician, not to the people of Canada, not to the Constitution, except for the divinity of the politician and to hold an oath to that politician, right or wrong, whatever the politician wants. So, folks, King's Court, that's what we get in Canada. Whether our Supreme Court or our superior courts of every province and territory. Now, the States is different. That was the first part. Then they go into Ike and Chief Justice Warren and all of it, and trying to twist it into some kind, when I say Ike, I mean President Eisenhower. And they get into 1953 and say, oh, they were doing so good, the justices were going this way, they were doing black rights, they're doing all these things that weren't of the federal power. I've got to stop it right there. Propaganda. King George VI died in 1952, but not before he made a monumental deal. Folks, anyone can look it up. Sir Winston Churchill, King George VI, made a promise to two countries in this world, the United States of America and the former Soviet Union. Teddy Roosevelt and one Joseph Stalin. That promise was to change the world into a mirror of what was the best of America and federalism, to give UN states individuality for the first time ever, to give all countries of the world equality, to enshrine territorial powers, regional powers, the ability for independence, and much, much more American freedoms all over the world, and labor from the Soviet Union, from all over the world. This is how the world would work. People could work, keep to themselves, have their powers, have their culture, have their education, have their languages. All these things never, ever enshrined in the world, ever. The American equality of the person, the blacks, that CNN goes on to act like SCOTUS Republican was breaching the American Constitution. No. They were honoring their world promises to the entire world, because just before that, just years before that, USA dropped atomic bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Okay? The world changed forever. League of Nations scrapped. United Nations born in San Francisco. Oh, Warren, Chief Justice out of California. Richard Nixon out of California. Oh, Ike. Federalism, how does this all tie in? A treaty signed with the entire world, based in the United States of America. It would move to New York, but it doesn't matter. It was a promise made to the world. USA had to deliver on their own soil. Equality of the person. And yes, Republicans in SCOTUS, the federal government, and all the states had to be educated in the new world order of the UN. And that was the quality of the person, at least in America, as it always was. And that was what ended segregation. That's what moved on. CNN does that story acting like SCOTUS was operating as some kind of maniac on its own, breaching the rules of federalism. No, USA bound itself into a world treaty with what would be now 193 nations. A Security Council, a new one, where America was world leader with 4 other allies. First time in world history. We never had civil rights in the world before World War II and the victorious allies of World War II. We never did. USA had to deliver on their own soil, as UK, France, Russia, China all had to deliver on theirs too. They signed other treaties. We watched it go on and on all the way through Nixon, all the way to 1975. Yes, SCOTUS had to change. Yes, in that time you see Ruth Ginsburg come along watching all of it, and she watched it all from World War II. She was a Democrat, but Warren was absolutely appointed and put forth as Chief Justice. He was from the Republicans. He was Ike all the way through to Nixon and more, and kept going, and the whole SCOTUS did, regardless of conservative liberal. They were not breaching the Constitution of the United States of America. They were correcting it with world-bound treaties. They promised the entire world. The states had to change with what was the new world order from what was a terrible, terrible, autocratic, dictatorial old world order, which is now the new world order, supposedly, but it's old world order. And everyone who talks about it, we see the Democrats gravitating to breaking that federalism. Clearly tonight they want to break SCOTUS with the will of the people. They talk about January 6th. But what does the propaganda, as we just go through the first 2 points of that 1 hour special, those first 2 points, clearly myth busted. CNN, with all its money, its all-star cast of investigative journalists, can't look at the world treaties that USA bound and signed. It's like they forgot that ever happened. They forgot it all happened. Why is it only Republicans freed the African American in the United States of America? Why would it be Richard Nixon who went down to the southern states enforcing world treaty that all 50 states had to, whether they liked it or not, accept or dissolve themselves as a UNSCP 5 power, one of the most powerful countries now in the world today? Why is it only Republicans did that work promised to the whole world and to the allies? If you've never read the UN Charter, the Declaration of Human Rights, and many other 5 binding laws, not a whole lot, folks, but there's a lot, and you find that the transformation of the world was never as good as what was done in those early years all the way through. Even after King George VI's death, United States never stopped. Does democracy take a lot of work? Sure it does. But remember, there's a world system of treaties. The USA binds and binds on everybody else. They have to honor it too. There's a federal system, a limited power system, and then there is a state level. And inside all of that, there's a Supreme Court that is designed to follow the Constitution word for word in constitutional law as it's written, not as what popular belief people think would be a good thing. Now, CNN and the lying, cheating Democrats wish to transform America into a unitary-style state. More power to the federal government at absolutely all the 50 states' expense. Totally and utterly against everything the Founding Fathers created. Totally against what all the Americans gave their lives for in the War of Independence. Totally against what America signed the world onto in what was the New World Order, the UN Charter in 1945, right there in San Francisco. Chief Justice Warren, yes, he was a Republican. Yes, he was appointed by a Republican president. Yes, Richard Nixon was vice president. Yes, Richard Nixon would go on to become president himself. They did more for equality of the person, of minority rights, than any other presidentials ever in the history of the United States. That's a fact. You're going to be hard-pressed to ever take all the monumental work that they all did and ever repeat that. I mean, I guess you don't really have to. Democrats failed time and time again. When you look at history as back as the 30s and then all the way up to the 70s, I don't see any other presidents actually going to schools, opening them up, or having votes of ending racism, ending segregation, or other things as early as the Republicans presented. You'll find that the Democrats voted against them. State powers are ultimately to be protected unless USA signs international treaties that require the states to change. And they do. It does take time. And they have internal constitutional amendments, way more on average than has ever been done by the United States of America itself in its federal division. Way more. You can look at the states, they're way more detailed, way more history, and how many amendments that most of those constitutions have been done. In fact, they have hundreds of pages of constitutional writings, growing, achieving, getting stronger all the time. SCOTUS is giving what's written in the Constitution back to the states. Democrats say, oh, Republicans are going to steal elections now because if they have a close vote, they're going to battle out, it's going to go to the state, and the state's going to pick its own electorates. And because most Republicans, or most states in the U.S. are Republican at the state level, they're going to turn around and change it to a Republican win. I guess that could be possible, but I don't see any justices playing rule of law off itself. They follow the Constitution to a T. USA gives the power to all rural Americans because they knew, they had the hindsight that what happens when you overpopulate a city, and the popular belief of the city folk who greatly outweigh all those rural folk. Where is their voice? And how long does it go until the rural folks are wiped out? And then America is into corporate farms, state farms, call it what you will. That's why they have these checks and balances. These checks and balances that don't exist in unitaries. The kind of checks and balances missing in a place like Ethiopia, as all the rural Ethiopians are starving, losing their land, having it degraded, getting dams put up, draining the water from their lands so their crops rot, turning them into civil war. Can you imagine that for any kind of time? That could easily come to America if you allowed the independent judiciary, SCOTUS, to become somehow liberalized in the left government, where all of a sudden it's the court of popular opinion. Because we all know, with fancy videos, fancy deals like CNN did tonight, it's easy to hide truths. You're not lying. You're only giving one side of history and completely ignoring the rest. The obligations the United States made to the world and said, we're going to change here at home too. Don't you worry. How does the world ever become better when we have rot like that in the United States? That's the biggest challenge against the United States today. And that comes from none other than Canada. What Joe Biden is doing and the Democrats is all been learned from watching Canada. Look at the autocratic regime. Look at all the money those politicians are making. Look at the great expense of their people they're doing. Look how much debt per person per capita at the federal and the territorial provincial level. Look at what they rip out of the people, and they do nothing. We can convince them to do it too. And that's exactly what's going on using Roe versus Wade, which is only the right thing, transferring a division of power back to the state level where it belonged. Where it belonged, folks. Are there others coming? Probably. But it's called rule of law. It's the Constitution as it's written. If Americans don't like that, it's called rally up, win Congress and Senate, and get yourself an amendment. If it means that much to the people, get it amended. But if you can't do that, obviously there's something wrong. Obviously, you've manipulated the people. Here in Canada, we're in Crown customary law, meaning our politicians only use the illusion of democracy. They can choose at any time. Hey, I don't like the democratic system. I don't even like the MP or MLA system. I am going to do a cabinet law, or I'm going to do a privy council law, and I'm going to get my crown positions appointed by me to sign it off. No votes necessary. Secret laws against the people. Liberals just did 11 since Justin Trudeau got into power, coming on 7 long years. Stephen Harper in his 8 years did 7. That's monumental. That's terrible. That's gross. Nothing conservative about that. Nothing that the Federalist Society of the United States of America would ever accept ever in a million years. Looking at what Canada's conservatives have done would not be welcomed in their system. Not at all. In fact, folks, it would be ruled treason. It'd be ruled treason. That's a fact. Not to be administered. Even worse than what the Democrats are attempting to do. That's my video, folks. Share, share, share. Learn something from this. I have my work cut out for me in the United States coming up, hopefully in November, if all my paperwork's in place. I'm still not sure the federal government of Canada is going to deliver on that. It's only going to be coming up on 6 months. Oh my gosh. Scary, scary times indeed. There's a lot I'd like to talk about. So much with Canada that needs to be discussed, but there's only so many hours in a day, and I'm already going back to work as my season comes to an end, as sad as that is too. But that's the state, the 6th state of Canada. And you know what? This is the 6th state of the United States of America. Watching CNN propagate half-truths. Oh, they're not lying, but they fail to give the other half of the account, the true story. They fail to give it to Americans as it is. And you think, how many poor souls watching that now are watching thinking, the justice system's got to be brought down. The only independent judiciary, real one, maybe not the only one in the world, but I would say all the fingers on my hand, less than the fingers on my hand, how many are independent. When I say independent, means they follow rule of law and not political parties. Regardless of what CNN tries to propagate, you'll find that everything those justices have done have been by rule of law in the division of powers, whether they understood it or not. And yes, over decades, things get lost and forgotten or purposely shuffled away. But I try to follow history. I try to read as much as I can, and I never let those things go. That's how we get these kinds of videos of truth, real truth, the other half of the story. Are Americans going to get that other half? They all knew it. They were all raised, and it was all part of school some 30, 40 years ago even. But sadly, those people are long gone today. They're not even alive to present that history. I mean, sure, the publications are there. You can draw it out. But who's going to do that? It's always a lot better when people have lived it. They were there for it. And now it's found its way in history, at least with the Democrats, at least with the Democrat Party. And that scares me. Folks, When a party in power is championing the People's Court of Popular Opinion, it's a violation of the highest laws of the land, meaning the party's criminal. Joe Biden and his Democrats are unlawful. Unlawful. I tagged my friend Richard Albert in it. I hope he gets to see it. I don't know what else to say. That's what I watched tonight, and it was sure half a history. Leave out the other half. Propagating what that political power wants. More federal power. More central government control. More power over the states, which is unlawful. That's my video. Share, share, share. Canadians, learn something from this. These specialties of the USA could be yours. It's written there since 1867. It tells you to cement those things. Never once have we ever codified any provincial or territorial constitutions. No property rights, just like the federal minister stated. Canadians don't have any property rights. Absolutely none of the First Peoples have any property rights. None whatsoever. They're not even given federalism. They're not even treated as human beings in this country. In fact, legally, it's savages. And it shows. We just watched it happen in Treaty 7. Treaty Indians don't get to barter deals. Not on lands, not even on their own reserves. The federal government decides for them. In autocratic, pure fashion. A centralized government, not even in your region, could give two shits about you. Sick, depraved, that's been removed from the United States of America? Absolutely! Since 1975. Ford, Richard Nixon's vice president. Richard Nixon did all the writing of it. Ford clearly articulated. He just finished it. Ford finished what Richard Nixon had done. Monumental civil rights for all Americans. Never ever repeated or seen again. Sick, depraved Democrats have nothing of any kind of racial justice and equality. Sure, you can make laws, but as every lawyer in justice will tell you, no matter what country in the world, laws are only laws if you enforce them. And last time I checked, it was Richard Nixon who went to those southern states. It was Richard Nixon who physically opened the doors, walked those buses to school for all those African-American children so they wouldn't be moth-cocktailed and burned down like it would have been happening for 8 years in Democrat legislation. Because again, you can make a law, but if you don't enforce it, is it really a law or you can't enforce it? Richard Nixon proved you can enforce it, and he did. He did. That's real. That's credible. That's true history. And then all the laws he did subsequently that no other president can match besides what Ike did with the Supreme Court of the United States of America. Monumental. Monumental. All Republicans, folks. Oh, and by the way, they were of the Federalist Society too. Ooh, a boogeyman. Ooh, a boogeyman. Limit the federal central government and ensure the state powers stay and remain? Yeah, that doesn't really sound like a boogeyman to me when you look at the definition, but the way CNN crafts everything, it makes it look like it's some secret society, some ultra-leftist conspiracy. Wow, rule of law and enforcing the Constitution as was written word for word. Yeah, rule of law, boy, that sure sounds like conspiracy to me. That's my video. Share, share, share. Get the knowledge from us. Get it out. Get it shared. It's important. Canadians have to wake up. I know Americans have to wake up. It's really scary. Bye now.